Today my girlfriend cheated on me with my best friend. Now, 5 years later, just before my wedding, an unexpected truth changed everything forever. I was 29 years old when everything pretty much went to hell, between me, my ex-girlfriend Jane, and my former roommate and supposed friend Ted. Jane and I had been together for a while, and it wasn't perfect, but I never thought anything suspicious was going on, at least not right in front of my face. Looking back, maybe there were signs. Like how she laughed too much at his dumb jokes or how she spent time in his room watching movies on his big TV. But I overlooked it because, I trusted them. Lesson learned, I guess. One night I came home from work and they were both acting weird, too nice, like they were trying too hard to pretend everything was normal. Jane offered to cook me dinner, something she never did, and Ted asked if I wanted to go grab a burger or something. It was strange, like they both felt guilty and were trying to overcompensate, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I just figured they were in a good mood or something, and honestly, I was tired, so I just went along with it. Then, one night, the truth came out in the worst possible way. I was fast asleep when my phone buzzed with a message from a mutual friend, Kyle, around 2 in the morning. It was a screenshot of a chat where Jane was talking to one of her friends about how she and Ted had been sleeping together for months. My head was spinning. I wanted to believe it was some twisted joke, but I knew Kyle wouldn't lie about something like that. He just said, "Dude, I thought you should know," and that was it. I remember just staring at the screen, feeling sick. My hands were shaking, and it was like every happy moment I'd ever had with Jane and every fun night with Ted just dissolved. I mean, this was the girl I had planned to marry, and my friend, whom I had let stay with us so he could get back on his feet. I felt like a fool. After a few minutes, I decided to confront them. I stormed out of my room, furious, and went straight to Ted's door. I didn't even knock, I just flung it open, and there they were, sitting together on his bed, looking like two guilty kids caught red-handed. The look on their faces told me everything. Jane mumbled some nonsense about how she wanted to tell me and that, it just happened. It just happened, like I was going to believe that kind of crap. It felt like everything was in slow motion. There was yelling, I don't even remember half of what I said, just that I was furious. Ted tried to act tough, telling me it wasn't a big deal because, according to him, Jane and I weren't working out anyway. Jane just sat there, looking like she was about to cry, but honestly, I didn't care. She had months to talk to me if she was so unhappy, months to end things instead of doing whatever the hell they were doing. When things started to calm down, well, as much as they could in that situation, I told them both to leave. I didn't care where they went. I just wanted them out of my sight. Ted tried to talk to me, saying he didn't mean for things to go that far, like that somehow made it better. Meanwhile, Jane kept saying she never meant for it to happen this way. It was all excuses. Everything, every word they said, was just something they thought would make me feel better, I guess. But nothing they said could fix it. I ended up crashing on a friend's couch that night. I just needed to be anywhere but in that apartment. The next morning, after 0 hours of sleep, I decided it was time to leave for good. I went back to the apartment to grab my stuff, and of course, they were both still there. Jane tried to stop me from leaving, talking about how she never wanted to lose me as a friend, which is a joke, because friends don't do what she did. I threw everything I could into bags and boxes, not even bothering to pack things neatly, I just wanted out. Ted stood in the corner, avoiding eye contact like the coward he is. I finally finished and told them both I didn't want anything more to do with them. Jane looked like she wanted to say something, but I didn't stay to hear it. I just walked out and didn't look back. After that, it was over with them. Over with that whole chapter. I didn't tell our mutual friends what happened because honestly, I thought they'd find out soon enough. But here's the part that really hurt, they didn't care. Some people reached out to say they were sorry about the drama, but when it came down to it, they chose to stay friends with Jane and Ted. I didn't know whether to laugh or get angry, but that only confirmed what I needed to do. I cut them all off, every single one of them. I moved back to my home state, changed my number, got rid of all my social media, and basically disappeared from that entire group of friends. At first, it felt brutal, like I was leaving behind everything I knew. But honestly, I knew I had to do it. I was never going to move on if I kept holding on to people who didn't have my back. So I left it all behind, and I never looked back. Not once. It was hard, especially at the beginning. There were days when I felt like maybe I was being too harsh or letting my anger control me. But every time I thought about reaching out to someone, I remembered that night, and how both of them looked at me like I was the one out of line. Like I was ruining some love story they had made up in their heads. I mean, seriously, it wasn't me sneaking around and lying to people's faces while pretending life was perfect. Right after that, I went through a rough patch trying to rebuild everything on my own. But slowly, I found new friends, got my career on track, and started making progress, little by little. I built a life I could be proud of. And eventually, I met Ashley. She is everything Jane wasn't: honest, loyal, and yes, genuinely respectful of the people in her life. She knew about my past and was at peace with how things were. She respected that I had left all of that behind and never tried to dig it up again. And with her, I truly started to feel happy again. So there I was, years after the incident, engaged to the most amazing woman I could imagine and miles away from all the drama. I thought I was free and clear, that I had left all that baggage behind for good. But as it turns out, I was wrong. Jane and Ted weren't done with me yet. So I was finally in a good place. Right after everything that happened with Jane and Ted, I left that mess behind, cut all ties, and moved on with my life. I was happily engaged to Ashley, and honestly, I thought I had closed that chapter for good. But apparently, that wouldn't be the case. It all started with a simple post. I'm not a big social media guy, but I thought, hey, why not share some good news? So I posted a photo of Ashley and me with a simple caption about our engagement. Just a quick pic of us looking happy, nothing too fancy. I figured I'd get a few likes from family and a handful of friends I still keep in touch with, and that would be it. Little did I know, that post would be the spark that dragged all that old drama back into my life. A couple of days after the post, I got a random message notification. I looked at my phone, and there it was, a message from Jane. I almost dropped my phone. I mean, after years of total silence, out of nowhere, she decides to show up. I didn't even open it. I just stared at her name, and all those old feelings came rushing back, the anger, the betrayal, everything. My gut reaction was to just delete it, but I stood there for a second, trying to figure out why the hell she'd reach out now. I hadn't thought about her in years, and I was happy with Ashley, so I didn't need closure or anything like that. I wasn't interested in hearing her side, her excuses, nothing. I had made peace with it all a long time ago. So without opening the message, I blocked her. Problem solved, right? Or so I thought. I told Ashley about it that night. I didn't want any secrets between us, especially with something that felt like a weird blast from the past. She just laughed and said I did the right thing. Just to be safe, she blocked Jane too. We both thought that would be the end of it, Jane got her closure or whatever, and she could move on too. But then, the fake profiles started popping up. At first, I didn't notice, because like I said, I'm not very active on social media. But Ashley started getting weird friend requests. From random accounts with 0 posts and some generic profile picture. She's smart though, so she didn't accept any of them. After a few, she started to suspect it might be Jane, and I couldn't help but agree. I mean, who else would be that persistent? Honestly, it was just annoying more than anything else. I hadn't thought about Jane in so long, and now here she was, playing games and trying to get my attention like we were still in high school. Eventually, I decided to just delete my social media entirely. There was no point in keeping it if it was only going to be used as a way for her to mess with me. I figured that if I wasn't online, she would have no choice but to give up. Before deleting my account, I sent one quick message from one of her fake profiles, the one that had finally messaged me directly. I told her to leave me alone and that I wanted nothing to do with her. I didn't even give her time to respond. I sent the message and blocked her right after. Then I deleted the entire account. That was it, finally over. Or so I imagined. I thought she'd get the hint and move on with her life. But no, not even close. Apparently, when I shut down my accounts, Jane decided to go around me completely. A couple of days later, my sister Mandy called me out of the blue. Now Mandy and I are close, but we don't usually talk every day, so I figured she was just calling to catch up or ask about the engagement plans. But she sounded serious, and I could tell something was going on. I didn't even get the chance to say hello before she just said, "Hey, I need to talk to you about something weird." I'm thinking, great, now what? She starts telling me how Jane had reached out to her. And not just a casual, "Hey, how are you" message. Jane apparently jumped straight into some bizarre story, claiming that I had a child. Yeah, you read that right, a child. At first, I laughed. I mean, it was ridiculous. I told Mandy she was probably just trying to get attention or something. But Mandy wasn't laughing. She said Jane was serious and sounded pretty desperate. Mandy had even tried to ignore her, but Jane had been persistent. She had sent photos of this kid, saying how much he looked like me, talking about how she never wanted to keep it a secret, blah, blah, blah. I didn't believe it. From my point of view, this was just Jane's latest desperate attempt to get my attention. I mean, if this were real, she would have had years to come forward. If this kid were mine, wouldn't she have contacted me for child support, or at least told me when she found out she was pregnant? It didn't make sense to me, and I told Mandy that. But Mandy said Jane seemed really insistent. I could tell Mandy didn't know what to believe either, which only made everything feel stranger. All of it messed with my head. I tried to ignore it like another one of Jane's lies, but part of me got stuck on the what if. What if she was actually telling the truth? The timing felt way too convenient, and I wasn't exactly ready to believe anything coming out of her mouth, but the idea of having a child out there, no, that's not something you can just ignore. Over the next few days, I couldn't focus. I'd be at work and my mind would drift back to Jane and this supposed kid. Ashley noticed I was acting weird and kept asking if I was okay. I didn't want to drag her into the mess, so I just said I was dealing with some work stress. But in reality, my mind was all over the place. The thought of a kid, my kid, possibly being out there didn't sit right. Eventually, I decided I couldn't just ignore it. I wanted to make sure Jane wasn't going to somehow show up at our doorstep later. I needed to end this once and for all, one way or another. So I called a lawyer. I didn't want to deal with her directly, but I figured a lawyer could send a letter, something official, to tell her to back off. I just wanted her out of my life. No more games, no more drama, nothing. I was moving forward with Ashley, and I didn't need my past dragging me back down. I explained everything to the lawyer, all the messages, the fake profiles, and finally the message that said, "You and I have a child." He listened and nodded, saying he'd take care of it. He said he'd send her a letter asking her to provide proof if she was being serious. Otherwise, she should leave me alone. It was a relief to hand it off to someone else. I didn't want to deal with Jane myself, and having a lawyer involved made me feel like this would finally be handled. With the lawyer taking over, I thought this would finally be the end. So I got him involved, and it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I was tired of Jane's nonsense, or at least I thought I was. I figured she'd get the letter and that would be enough to make her back off. But just a few days later, the lawyer called me, saying he needed to see me in person to discuss the situation. I assumed he was just going to tell me Jane had backed off, so I walked into his office feeling pretty relaxed. He sat me down and didn't say much at first, just handed me an envelope. Inside were photos. Several of them. Of a small child. And I don't know how else to say it, but the kid looked exactly like me. It was weird, like looking at an old picture of myself when I was younger. Same dark hair, same eyes, even a similar smile. I sat there staring, feeling a mix of anger and confusion. My lawyer explained that Jane had sent the photos as proof, along with a note explaining the timeline. According to her, she got pregnant shortly after I caught her and Ted together. But she and Ted assumed the baby was his. Supposedly, they didn't say anything to me because, they thought Ted was the father and just carried on with their lives. It wasn't until later, when they tried to have more kids, that they found out Ted was sterile. Apparently, that's when doubt started creeping in. To be honest, part of me still thought this was some elaborate scheme. I mean, Jane was never exactly trustworthy, and it all seemed a little too convenient. But the photos were hard to deny. The child had features that were unmistakably mine. Still, I wasn't about to take her word for it without real proof. So I told my lawyer to arrange a DNA test. I needed something concrete before I could even begin to process what was happening. Waiting for those results was brutal. Each day felt like a week, and I could barely focus on anything else. I told Ashley what was going on because I didn't want to keep her in the dark. She was supportive, but I could tell she was worried. I mean, this wasn't just some random drama. If this child was mine, it would change everything. She stuck by my side though, reassuring me that whatever happened, we'd face it together. After what felt like an eternity, the results finally came in. My lawyer called and said, "It's a match." I didn't know what to feel, relief, shock, anger, maybe all of the above. There I was, finding out I had a child I'd never known. A child who had been raised believing Ted was his father, who had no idea who I was. It's one thing to discover your child isn't who you thought they were, it's another thing entirely to realize you missed the first 5 years of your child's life because someone hid it from you. My head was spinning. I tried to wrap my mind around the fact that this little boy was mine. That I had a son. But then, almost immediately, my thoughts went to Ted. How he had accepted all of this and raised my son as his own, even while knowing there was a chance the child wasn't his. And Jane, she had years to be honest. Years to at least give me a heads up. But instead, she kept everything buried, only reaching out now that she saw I was doing well. It was impossible not to feel used, like she had only contacted me because suddenly my life looked good on paper. It wasn't about me, and it definitely wasn't about the kid. She just saw an opportunity and decided to seize it. That realization felt like a punch to the gut and only fueled my anger. But at the same time, I had to think about my son, what this meant for him. He didn't ask to be brought into this mess, and I wasn't going to abandon him just because his mother and Ted had lied to me. I told my lawyer to contact Jane and Ted and tell them, yes, I would be involved in my son's life. I wanted visitation rights, and I was more than willing to pay child support. I wasn't going to let them set the terms anymore, especially after everything they had kept from me. But as soon as my lawyer mentioned visitation, Ted lost it. According to what my lawyer told me, Ted insisted he was the child's real father and didn't want me anywhere near his son. I mean, the audacity. The guy cheats with my girlfriend, raises my son without saying a single word to me, and now wants to pretend I don't exist. I was furious. I told my lawyer to let Ted know that if I was paying child support, I wasn't just some random check in the mail, I was going to be part of my son's life, whether he liked it or not. Of course, Jane jumped in, trying to smooth things over. She suggested we could work something out where I'd pay, but maybe the visits could be discreet to avoid confusing the child. I wasn't going to accept that. If they wanted money, they'd better be ready to let me be there as his father, plain and simple. And if they refused, I'd open a savings account for my son and let him access it when he turned 18. But I wasn't going to take part in whatever twisted scheme they had in mind. The whole situation felt surreal. There I was, ready to be a father, something I never thought I'd have to consider this soon, and all I was getting was resistance. I couldn't understand their logic. They wanted my money but didn't want me involved. It felt like they were trying to pick and choose which parts of me they wanted in their lives, like I was just a wallet they could call on when it suited them. I wasn't having it. I decided to push harder. I told my lawyer to make it clear that if I was going to pay child support, I would seek full visitation rights, or whatever rights I was entitled to as the biological father. I wasn't going to let them turn me into some background character in my own son's life. And if they didn't agree, then they wouldn't get a cent from me. Financially, I'd rather save for my son's future than let them control this situation. Jane and Ted threw every guilt trip in the book, calling me selfish and saying I was just trying to ruin their family. It was honestly ridiculous coming from the two people who had hidden an entire child from me. Selfish? If anyone was selfish, it was them, pretending they were this perfect family while knowing the truth the entire time. So here I am, ready to fight for my son. I don't know how this will play out, but I know one thing, I won't let them push me out of his life. They may have kept him from me for 5 years, but I'll be damned if I let them keep him from me any longer. After telling my lawyer that I was in this for the long haul, we got serious about what I could actually do here. I mean, legally it's not as simple as you'd think. Jane and Ted had the advantage, 5 full years, and because Ted was on the birth certificate, he was considered the legal father. My lawyer explained that in cases like this, even if you're the biological father, it's not a simple matter of stepping in and getting full rights. It was going to take time, money, and well, a lot of patience, and patience isn't exactly my strength. Jane and Ted didn't make it easy, either. My lawyer reached out to schedule a meeting to discuss visitation, but Ted refused to even sit down. He sent a long, dramatic email about how he was the only father my son had ever known and didn't want the child's life disrupted by me entering it. Jane actually used the word disrupted, like my son was some project she was working on and didn't want me ruining it. This guy. Meanwhile, Jane kept trying to negotiate some kind of weird middle ground. She suggested I could visit my son, but only if it was on her terms. She wanted me to agree to see him maybe once every few months, preferably when Ted wasn't around. Apparently, the idea was to keep things quiet so the child wouldn't be confused about who his father was. But here's the thing, I am his father, biologically and morally. I wasn't going to be shoved into some secondary, hidden role in my own son's life. I told my lawyer that their terms were unacceptable. Either they let me into his life as his father, or they wouldn't get a dime from me. They couldn't have it both ways, no matter how much they tried to make it sound reasonable. And predictably, they lost it. Jane suddenly started sending guilt-ridden emails, things about how I was hurting my son by refusing to contribute financially. Ted, on the other hand, went fully territorial, sending messages saying I was only showing up because I didn't want my past mistake to haunt me. Mistake? My son was not a mistake. If anything was a mistake, it was trusting either of them in the first place. So my lawyer went back and forth with them for weeks. At this point, the emails were a mix of guilt trips and attempts to shame me. They wanted to blame me and persuade me to give up, but every time I sat there, I kept thinking about my son. He didn't know me yet, but I wanted to make sure that when he was old enough, he would know I fought to be in his life. I wasn't going to just sign checks and stay on the sidelines while some other guy played the role that should have been mine. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we got them to agree to a meeting. It was incredibly uncomfortable. Jane showed up first, looking tense like she was about to face some corporate board or something. Ted walked in a few minutes later and didn't look at me once. He just sat down and crossed his arms like he was staging some kind of silent protest. The energy in that room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Jane started talking, going on about how she had only kept it a secret because she thought it was for the best. The best? I asked, barely able to keep my voice steady. How is keeping a child away from his father for 5 years the best? She mumbled some excuse about thinking Ted was the father and not wanting to complicate things by bringing me into it. Then Ted finally spoke up, deciding to chime in. I raised him. I taught him to ride a bike. I was there for every scraped knee, every school project, he said, as if I were some intruder trying to steal his child. The thing is, I get it. He was there. He did the dad stuff. But that doesn't change the fact that I'm the biological father and I deserve the chance to be there too. We argued for hours, going back and forth until it felt like we were just repeating ourselves. They kept circling back to what was best for him, but what they really meant wasn't what was best for him, it was what was best for them. They wanted me in the background, out of sight, just the bank account they could tap into whenever they wanted. They kept saying things like, "We don't want to confuse him." But the kid was 5 years old. Eventually, he would get curious about me. How long did they plan to keep this up? Finally, my lawyer stepped in and laid out our terms clearly. If they wanted child support, then I had to be given permission for regular visitation. Plain and simple. Ted looked like he was going to explode, but I wasn't backing down. This wasn't about them anymore. It was about my son and my right to be in his life. Jane tried one last move, saying maybe we could revisit the idea in a year or two when my son was more settled. But I was done compromising. I told them that if I didn't get fair visitation, I would open a savings account for him. He'd have that money waiting for him when he turned 18, and he'd know that I tried to be there. I wasn't going to keep funding their family while they pretended I didn't exist. When I said that, Jane's face dropped. I could see she hadn't expected me to be that firm. Maybe she thought I'd cave and pay just to avoid trouble. But that wasn't going to happen. I wasn't going to be some distant ghost in my son's life just because it was more convenient for them. I wanted him to know me. To know that I was there. And that I cared enough to fight for him. The meeting ended without any real resolution, and it was frustrating, to say the least. But I walked out knowing I had made my position clear. They knew I wasn't just going to fade into the background, no matter how badly they wanted that. And if they wanted financial support, they'd have to give a little too. As I walked out of that room, I felt a mix of anger and sadness. Anger at everything Ted had put me through, and sadness because, in a twisted way, Ted was right. He had been there during those years I couldn't be. And nothing I did would change that. But that didn't mean I was giving up. I would be in my son's life, whether they liked it or not. Leaving that tense meeting, I felt drained but determined. It was clear at that point that Jane and Ted were going to make this as hard as possible. But I knew I couldn't just walk away from my son. The stakes were too high, and I wasn't going to let them decide my involvement on their terms. But honestly, the frustration was eating me up. It felt like every step forward was blocked by their stubbornness. A few weeks passed, and things stayed mostly quiet. My lawyer and I were still working on officially securing visitation rights, and I was prepared to go to court if that's what it took. I didn't care about the hassle anymore, I just wanted to be there for my son. But then Jane tried a different tactic, a message. This time, without any legal involvement. She sent it directly to me, bypassing my lawyer, which caught me off guard. It was like she was trying to appeal to me personally, hoping to find some common ground, or maybe convince me to back off. Her message started out friendly, which threw me. She said something like, "Hi, you. I've been thinking about everything, and I realize this has been hard for you too." She went on about how she never meant to hurt me back then and that, in some twisted way, she thought she was doing what was best for our son. She added that Ted was still struggling to come to terms with everything and felt threatened by my sudden reappearance in the picture. I admit, part of me wondered if she was genuinely trying to make things right. But the other part of me knew better. It wasn't like she had suddenly grown a conscience. She had kept my son from me for years. Let Ted play father. And only came clean when it suited her. Her message felt more like an angle she was working than a real apology. Still, I kept reading, wanting to see where she was going with it. Then she dropped what I think was her real point. She suggested a compromise. She said she could imagine me having a relationship with our son, but only if I agreed to limit it to a few visits a year and avoid telling him the truth about who I really was. She called it an opportunity to keep the peace for everyone. She painted it like she was doing me a favor, offering me this small role in the life of my own son, while keeping Ted as the main father figure. At that moment, any thought I had of giving her the benefit of the doubt flew right out the window. A few visits a year and a silent role. I wasn't going to be a glorified uncle in my own son's life. If she thought I'd agree to that, she clearly didn't know me at all. I replied with a short, direct message. If I'm paying child support, I'm his father. Period. Take it or leave it. She didn't reply, and I assumed that was the end of that conversation. A few more days passed, and just when I thought things were calming down, Ted called. This was the first time I had actually heard his voice in years, and to be honest, it triggered a wave of anger in me. But I made an effort to stay calm and let him talk. He started by saying he wanted to clear the air and that he thought maybe we could find a way to work this out like adults. I had my doubts, but I kept listening. He admitted he'd been struggling with the whole situation and was trying to come to terms with it. He even made a few comments about how he respected that I wanted to step up and be involved. But then he got to the real point. He said he was afraid my involvement would confuse our son, that it might make him feel like he had two dads, which, according to Ted, wasn't healthy for a child his age. I'll be honest, he almost had me with the whole, let's be adults, angle. But the more he talked, the clearer it became that he was just trying to get me to back off. He wasn't interested in finding common ground. He was interested in keeping things exactly the way he wanted them, with me in the background. I cut him off mid-sentence and told him straight up, if I'm going to pay, I'm going to be part of his life. I'm not here to make things easy for him or for Jane. This is about my son. Ted tried to jump back in, saying something about how I was ruining a family, but I didn't care. I hung up, feeling like that was probably the last time we'd ever have a civil conversation, if you could even call it that. After that, everything went quiet again, but I knew the next steps would be legal. It felt like the strange calm before the storm, and I just focused on preparing myself for whatever fight was coming next. But I wasn't going to back down. I would be a real father to my son, not some occasional visitor or ghostly figure in his life. In the meantime, Ashley was my rock. She kept me grounded and reminded me that I was doing the right thing, even when I felt like the whole world was against me. She was there through every update, every frustrating conversation, every new tactic Jane and Ted tried. I couldn't have gotten through this without her. One night, while we were talking about the future, Ashley said something that really stuck with me. She said, "Your son deserves to know the real you, and one day he'll thank you for fighting to be there." It was exactly what I needed to hear. This wasn't about revenge or getting back at Jane and Ted. It was about my son, and making sure he knew that his real father cared enough to stand up for him. So here I am, still fighting, still waiting for the legal process to unfold. I don't know how long it'll take or what obstacles they'll throw at me next, but I know I'm not going to stop. One day, my son will know the truth, and he'll know I did everything I could to be in his life. It's been a tough journey, but I wouldn't change a thing, because at the end of the day, he's worth it. Final update. After months of back and forth, court dates, and more frustration than I can put into words, we finally reached an agreement. I would have regular visitation rights, scheduled hours where I could be with my son. My son. Without Jane and Ted's rules hanging over me. It wasn't the perfect outcome. I wanted to be his father in every sense. But given the circumstances, it was something. The first visit felt surreal. I remember standing outside the park where we had agreed to meet. My heart was racing like I was meeting him for the first time, and in a way, I was. When he ran toward me, there was this moment where everything just clicked. I saw myself in him, the same curious look, the same wild energy. I don't think I stopped smiling the entire time. We played, talked, and laughed. He showed me all the things he loved, like any normal kid. And during that hour or two, I felt like I was part of his life, like I was his dad. It's not easy. I still have to see Jane and Ted. Still deal with the boundaries they impose. And sometimes, I leave feeling like I've barely scratched the surface of knowing him. But with every visit, I feel like he's opening up a little more to me. I'm not just a stranger anymore. I'm his father, and he knows it, even if he doesn't fully understand it yet. And as for Jane and Ted, they're moving on with their lives. I think they're finally starting to accept that I'm not going anywhere. That I'm a permanent part of this child's life, whether they like it or not. They don't have to like it, but they respect it. And that's enough for now. Ashley has been my anchor through all of this. She's met my son too, and seeing her with him only made me more certain that she's the one. We're planning our wedding, and even though I still can't be a full-time dad, I have this dream of someday having him by my side, maybe as my best man when he's older. By my side as a real part of my family. It's not a fairy tale ending. I'll never get those first 5 years back. But every visit, every laugh, every time he calls me Dad, in his own way, makes all the struggle worth it. And maybe someday, when he's old enough, I'll tell him the whole story, not to make him choose sides, but so he knows that from the beginning, I fought to be there. And I'll keep showing up, as long as he wants me to. What did you think of the story? Leave your opinion in the comments. Thanks so much for watching, and see you next time.